Hello and welcome back to the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. In 1975, legally required to record 3 songs for borrowing lyrics, John Lennon set out on a cathartic project to put his own spin on a collection of rock and roll classics from the 50s and 60s. In a chaotic studio environment, these 13 cover songs were produced by Phil Spector and represented a nostalgic trip down memory lane for Lennon in what would be his final solo studio album, recounting and recalling the music that inspired him before fame, fortune and beatlemania took over. Joining me to discuss this cover album, which it is my co-host Mr. Felipe Amarim. How you doing, man?
Doing great, man, and you?
Yeah, very well, thank you, very well. Now, the first time you told me about this album, I think we were on tour together, and I'd had no clue that an album like this had been done or released or, just put out into the world. Because when you think, obviously when you think of the Beatles, obviously they've got their list of albums, they're very prominent, they're very big, they're very famous, and then John Lennon's got his as well, and Paul McCartney's got his, and George Harrison's got his. None of them did a cover album full of rock and roll songs, did they? Except John.
Well, I think Paul McCartney did one later on, which we should cover as well. We should talk about that one. Yeah.
He did it after John did it.
Yes, called Run Devil Run. But that was like, is it 90s or early 2000s? That's like way more recent than this one. He hasn't done it when all the Beatles were still alive. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Excellent.
That is a unique project for a Beatle,
it is, yeah, and it takes you by surprise, man. And I remember listening to this. I got the fields outside our house. I remember we came back from tour, and you told me to listen to it, and I'd go on my walks around the field and I listened to it, and it's just brilliant. But first off, why don't you tell us how the album came about? So for viewers and listeners, this is Felipe chose this album, and we're kind of doing it a bit lighthearted today, aren't we? It's not like this isn't one of the albums like Sgt. Pepper or Dark Side of the Moon, where we need to talk about its incredible effect on the music industry. No, this is just a really cool cover album done by a really cool guy, and that's what we're going to do today. So why don't you tell us how the album came into being?
Well, the story behind the album is actually it's a lawsuit against John Lennon, isn't it? Because when he wrote "Come Together," the song's got some lines, or just one line from a Chuck Berry song called "You Can't Catch Me," which is in the album, by the way. And I have a point about that one, which I'm going to say later. So the lyrics and the melody resemble that song, and so he got this lawsuit, and he got into an agreement with the guy who owned the copyright. There's a show business kind of guy, like manager, called Maurice Levy, and he sued John Lennon and said, "Look, if you record 3 of my songs, meaning songs that he owned the copyrights for, then I'm going to make some money out of it. So you just record 3 of the songs that I own, and that's it. It's all sorted." But Lennon didn't know what to do about that, because he was like, all the albums he was doing is about personal stuff and his own views and about the world and life and everything else. And he was like, I don't want to just sing cover songs.
Yeah.
And he tried to squeeze one song, just like a snippet of a song, like a little bit of it in an album that was recorded pretty much at the same time as this one. But Maurice Levy wasn't happy about this. So I want 3 whole songs. And then Lennon ultimately decided to do a whole album of covers, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to just squeeze more songs in his other project. So it did not start as something that Lennon wanted to do.
No, he still wasn't happy, was it, as it went on?
He wasn't happy until he started. And by the way, so there's an interesting moment of his life, because he wasn't with Yoko at that point. They were separated for a bit, and he was just drinking a lot and not being really productive in terms of music. So the album came about as an expression of his teenage years, isn't it? It's like he was back to the rock and roll lifestyle, drinking and having fun, and that was actually a problem for the album. But
we'll get to that later. I think so you touched on everything about the lawsuit. I don't think I have anything on my notes to add, except from the point that John Lennon didn't want to do this, but he went with it. And I suppose I'm amazed of how he can turn something negative into something positive, because he's gone and obviously he's been sued, and you can hear it. I mean, you said you want to talk about it later, but you can hear the line. Like when I first listened to it, I was like, that does sound like Come Together, and then you can hear it. So we'll talk about it later. But
Yeah.
I think to be in a situation where you've been like, right, I've screwed up, I'm gonna have to do this to make this guy happy. But on top of that, why don't I run with this and make have a bit of fun with it? And to go back and dig into his youth and to look back at the songs that made him and the Beatles what they became 15 years later,
Yeah.
I think it's just really impressive to sort of take that hit. Excuse me, take that hit and roll with it.
Yeah, I think he did a great job out of that, unusual circumstances, isn't it? It's like, so you don't want to do the project, you have to do it. It's a legal obligation somehow, and then say, okay, how can I make the best out of it? And it's the only album that he sounds like kind of relaxed. I think John Lennon always
He
sounded like
does.
worried about something, or struggling or suffering. And this album is just him having fun. I think he really felt like he was back in time and singing. So the pictures we got for the background in the show, like I've got one of John with the guitar, and you got John. It looks like he's in a club or a house somewhere. They're both taken in Germany. Those pictures, and yours is the album cover, isn't it?
Kind of,
And
yeah.
yeah, so he wanted the album cover to be to reference that time in his life where the Beatles were playing Hamburg in Germany. So I think they were playing those songs. So there's none of those songs were like new to John. Like
Yeah.
that was the soundtrack of his teenage years, really.
Yeah, excellent. And I think the cover, he said he wanted it to be an understated, a relaxed look back. And the fact that the fact that there's a picture of him from the early 60s or the late 50s on the album cover is just cements the fact that this is a nostalgic piece of art for him.
It's like something like he was doing something else, which is the album Walls and Bridges. He wanted to do that project, and this is something like, okay, it's like getting into a time machine, going back in time and doing something for a couple of months and then coming back.
But I feel like we saw that as well with the last Beatles album, which, what's that called? Oh God, the one with Let It Be.
Let It Be, of course. Yeah.
That is a great album. And when you hear the album before, which is Abbey Road, and it's very, I don't want to say progressive, but they're using lots of technological stuff. The chord choices are unusual. There's some 3 songs that run one into another.
Some longer songs as well.
Yeah, and with Let It Be, they went back to their roots. Some good old rock and roll. Obviously, you've got some songs like The Long and Winding Road, which is an advanced piece of music. They wouldn't have written that back in the early 60s. But they did kind of go back to the beginning and just sort of look at it. And I love that John's done this again, but to a much more direct extent. He hasn't gone back, listened to the songs he liked in his youth and said, I'm going to write music like that. He's just covered them. And I think it's really cool. And it's important because this is one of the earliest albums dedicated to covering classic rock and roll songs. Just straight up, as in, we know that Little Richard and Elvis Presley, they would be covering other people's songs most of the time.
Yeah.
But it's not the same, especially when you hit the mid-1970s, because bands are writing original music. The album has been established by the Beatles in 1965, Rubber Soul. People now understand that artists and their music is a part of them, which is why obviously you have so much original music in that time, and a good original rock music. Rock and roll as a genre was falling out of favour with the fans because you had this sort of glam rock was coming, disco was coming, pop was going a lot more electronic and synthy. You had Zeppelin and The Who sort of moving rock along. Rock and roll was sort of starting to dwindle a little bit, and I just love that John Lennon had the courage to be like, no, do you know what? I'm going to reconnect with my influences and inspirations and go back to the roots of rock and roll.
Yeah, he had to do it, but he did it really well. It wasn't just the obligation, I guess, in the end. I think
that's what I'm saying. He's just made something really good out of something that might have been a shitty situation at the start.
Yeah, there's something about the first part of the album, because basically the album was recorded in LA and New York, wasn't it? So because they had the LA session musicians, some of the best and most expensive musicians available, and Phil Spector was called to produce the album, and he was famous for his wall of sound production style, which is like over layering instruments, like you have 3-4 guitars doing the same thing to make it sound bigger. I mean, it's a complex concept altogether. We're not going to get into that. But Lennon wanted him to produce, and he said with those words, "I just want to sing."
Yeah.
For the first time, he didn't want total creative control and tell the musicians what to play. He did not want that for the first. As a starting point, it wasn't the idea. I think he had to take over for the second half of the recordings in New York and kind of be the producer.
Let's talk about them now then. So these were, as I mentioned in the intro, these were chaotic recording sessions. I'm going to list a few reasons why. So first of all, as Felipe said, this was recorded in the period known as the Lost Weekend, where he was actually separated from Yoko Ono. And this involved partying very, very hard with his musician friends. Who did I read? Harry Nilsson, Keith Moon... Ringo Starr, of course. Yeah, so they were all there.
Keith Moon is involved. It can't be good.
No, it's just like one of those names. When you read that on the guest list, you're like, okay, this is going hard. But now the other factor that you mentioned was Phil Spector, who is a wonderful producer, but an erratic and uncontrollable man and a human being. His attitude and commitment was, let's say, questionable. He was always late. He left musicians waiting for hours. Sometimes he'd just disappear without an explanation. Showing up, there's even one story that he showed up to the session armed with a gun, and he fired the gun. And he fired the gun into the ceiling, terrifying the musicians.
Health and safety wasn't a thing, was it?
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? But here's the best part. There's a story that he pointed the gun at John Lennon, and John Lennon said, "But you know what, I'm going to try and do a Lennon accent. It's kind of like this, the Lennon accent. No, it's not very good. Oh, John, my name's John Lennon. All right, I'll go for that." He goes, Phil, if you're going to kill me, at least let me finish the album. So apparently they're in the studio. Phil Spector's got a gun pointed at John Lennon, and John's like, "For fuck's sake, Phil, could you just let me finish the album, please?" That was more Manchester than Liverpool. Apologies for that. If you're from up north,
anywhere in the north would do for me. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What did we say when we were on tour? We had that joke that was like, "Where are we going? North?" Or accent north.
Accent north,
yeah. Because being from London, if you listen around the world and you're not from the UK, Felipe lives in London, and to him, anything north of like Bedfordshire, so between Bedfordshire and Birmingham, that's north. But then when you go above Birmingham, it's accent north, because you just can't understand what anyone's saying. Anyway, exactly. But following all this stuff, after all the sessions were done, did you know Phil Spector ran off with the tapes?
Yeah, the thing that what happened was he was really upset that the project wasn't going anywhere. That's the other really rock and roll aspect of the album. They were not getting anywhere with the album, so Phil just took the tapes with him and fucked off. I think it was like a few days after that he was involved in a car crash, wasn't it?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
really?
And then he was in coma, so he didn't have the...
Oh my god! Well, I obviously missed the part out, because I've got in my notes a few months after that happened. It took a lot of time, a lot of legal stuff, and a lot of effort for John Lennon to retrieve the tapes. When he did get them back, some of them were unusable. So he basically scrapped what he couldn't use and started again. In essence, he got some new musicians, and he he had stuff he could use, but he just built on it and created more stuff, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, he apparently there wasn't much from the early tapes. When they finally recovered the tapes, there was not much usable recording. So he had to start some stuff from scratch. I think there are a few things from the early recordings. But the initial concept is lost, which is like, I have a producer, I'm just going to turn up and sing. That's it. He's in charge of everything. I think Lennon had to be in charge. So he was doing another album, Walls and Bridges, and which is his music, his own thing. And he took that crew from that album, the New York musicians and engineers and everything else, and used them to finish this album. So you have a little bit of LA, a little bit of New York, and a little bit of Phil Spector as a producer, and a little bit of Lennon as a producer. So because he had to take over and make it work. Then that's kind of a turning point for him, because wait a minute, I need to get my life back on track. I can't just keep partying all day. If I want to get some music out there, I need to behave properly. I need to,
Do things properly. Yeah,
do things
exactly.
properly, work hard, and finish the album. It's a miracle that the album even exists. To be
But
fair.
thank God it does, right?
Yeah.
Um, Excellent. Okay, so what else have we got to talk about? I mean, so the final. I mean, hold on. We've got two things. You wanted to talk about Lennon's personal life. Have we done that? Or
Yeah,
were you talking
well,
about the party and
yeah.
the
I
break
want to
from
talk about
Yoko?
what happens after as well. Yeah,
Okay,
but
so should we,
it's basically that.
yeah, go for it. You take us where you
No,
want, bro.
so basically, this change of lifestyle happened after the album. So that was 1975. He only released one more album after this, wasn't it?
Yeah,
With
but it's not.
Yoko.
Yeah,
It's not a
exactly.
solo album, and it's something completely different. And he wanted to spend more time at home and be a father. So he had another child, and then he was focused in being a husband and a father. So no longer like being a musician. That wasn't the main thing for him. So this is kind of pretty much his last big contribution to the music world, isn't it? Because it came after Walls and Bridges, like 5 months after. So he recorded both albums at the same time. This one was released kind of a few months later. So
I
it's interesting to think about that as
Well,
one of his last projects.
no, I completely agree, and I actually. So I've listened to this album. Like I said, you showed me, you put me onto it a few years ago. I've played it every couple of months just as some backing music, but I've sort of focused again today. And when doing the research on it, I'd say it almost brought a tear to my eye, thinking how poetic is it that his final solo contribution towards music and an album was him looking back and saying, "Look at all my success. Look at what I've done. Look what I've done with the Beatles. Look what I've done on my own. These are the 13 songs that got me going."
Yeah, interesting.
I got goosebumps, man. It's so poetic, isn't it? The life of John Lennon, and although you had the 5 years more, one more album, co-album with Yoko before he died, it I'm almost lost for words. It really is poetic and quite sad that he's just his final bow of a solo album was just like these songs are why I'm here.
Yeah, and I think
Lovely,
it's
isn't it?
interesting. It's just a great story when you think about it, and the fact that the Beatles recorded the song at the end of Abbey Road, which was pretty much the last thing they'd done together,
Yeah.
because Let It Be was released after Abbey Road, wasn't it? But not
Yep.
but recorded just at the same time or before. So the song "The End" has the three of them jamming and soloing. So there's like the three of them, because Ringo's playing drums, of course. So you have Lennon, Harrison, and McCartney just playing the solos, and like there's a guitar battle at the end between the three of them, just like they used to do in the beginning. So before Paul McCartney became the bassist, so they used to be. I think there was a certain period where the three of them were playing guitar in the band, and so the end of the Beatles is a reference to the beginnings of the Beatles, and the end of John Lennon's solo career is pretty much the same thing as it was at the beginning, which
That's
is
amazing,
really
man. Yeah,
interesting.
great point.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, unless you had anything more you want to say about his personal life, should we talk about why the album stands out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, I was amazed at how good he made these old rock and roll songs sound. I listened to the songs. Quick side note for listeners and viewers. As we normally do every episode, we do an album. If you go down to the show notes, you'll see a dedicated Spotify playlist where we put all the songs from John Lennon's album in, and then also for this episode, I've put every song of the original in the playlist as well. So you can go and listen to one of John's, listen to the original, and then you're going to be along with us. I was just surprised at how good he made them sound. And I'm not talking good in terms of really well produced, because it is well produced, but it is also quite raw and unpolished. You get that rock and roll feel with it, but you can hear 20 years of technological advancement between Little Richard's original version and John Lennon's cover.
Yeah.
And it just does something that it almost legitimizes it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's almost like, you hear an old rock and roll song and you say, oh, it's good. The production sounds like shit. That guitar's out of tune. We missed a note there. But because it's rock and roll, you're like, you forgive the mistakes and the inadequacies of the production. But John Lennon taking it and saying, no, I listened to this stuff, and everything you've heard since then and now is thanks to these songs. he's taken it, applied session musicians, applied a modern day, for the time, a modern day studio, applied his own artistic integrity to it. And he's just given us a result that sounds obviously similar to the original because it's a cover, but just in a different world. Did you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. And some of the songs, they are not really versions, like they're not his own versions of it. It's like pretty much copying the original performance, the original arrangement.
Exactly.
I think his voice stands out, of course. It's John Lennon through and through. When you hear his voice, his expression on that kind of, and that, the accent and everything else, it's him. It's there, and it makes it sound unique. But the energy is kind of the same sort of energy and vibe from the original recordings, and I think he wanted to be somehow faithful to his heroes. He didn't want. I think, in the end of the day, it's safe to say he didn't overdo anything. There's no there's no. I don't know there's no vocal techniques or whatever that make the song sound too different from the original. He wasn't trying to do that.
Yeah, solos, vocal intensity, all that stuff is just perfect.
Stand By Me is one of the great examples in the album, isn't it?
Yeah.
It does sound a lot like the original. I don't remember if it's the same key. It's been a while since I've listened to Benny King's version of that one, but it's very similar.
I think it is the same key from what I remember, but I could be wrong.
The tempo is very similar. The bass line, guitars, everything. It's like he's just doing his thing on top of it.
The what was I going to say? I was going to say something. In his vocals. So you remember at the start with the Beatles in the first few albums, although they're serious. Did you ever find with the first few Beatles albums there was a little element of humour in there? Just in terms of some of the way they spoke.
Sure.
I love it in the last song.
Mm-hmm.
This last song is called, The last song is called Just Because. And it's a cover by the original's Lloyd Price. Yeah. And what he does at the start of it, he goes, I don't know the word for word, but he does something like oh, back to her. I heard this when I was 14. Da, da, da. And the music, and he's talking over it. He goes, maybe I was 15 when I heard it. Da, da, da. Could have been 22. Da, da, da. Or maybe I was 12. And it's just like this really funny commentary along with it, that you had a whole album of good rock and roll covers with no... It's almost like it doesn't break the fourth wall. It's just, here are the covers... No one's talking to me. And then you get to the last song of John Lennon's solo career. And he's giving you a little, I listened to this when I was 12. Brilliant. Just brilliant. Yes. Why? Why would he have done that? Never taking
himself too seriously,
no,
right?
but why would he have done that? Like, but I'm not criticising. I'm confused as to why it's there, but it makes it so good. Because
it's almost like he knew it was the end.
I'm getting goosebumps, man, because it's all so poetic. Just the final song, him literally saying, and this is what I heard when I was 15. Just so
and that
so
was
lovely.
the sense of humor he was famous for.
Exactly.
In the early days,
That's exactly my point.
It's not the serious John Lennon tried to, criticize government for going to war and all the stuff, all the political stuff he did later. It's just like, I'm having fun playing some songs, singing some songs that I like, and I'm going to, make a joke at the very end of the album, which is great. There's one thing I want to say about the song that actually was the reason why the album had to be recorded, which is "You Can't Catch Me." That song, if you listen, I really recommend that people listen to Chuck Berry's version of it. And it is Come Together. Make your own judgment of that, but listen to that and listen to Come Together. You're going to see the resemblance. You're going to see how the melody and the lyrics are very, very similar, or the idea of the lyrics, even if it's just one line, there's exactly the same. But now, I think what he did, it might have been a piss take. He made that song sound even more like Come Together. Do you have this feeling when you listen to it? The way he arranged
100%.
it, So,
sorry,
like, you know what? You think, So if everyone is saying I stole this song, I know this, and this is like plagiarism, let's just make it more clear.
I know, I love it. I love it. It's like a little right. You want me to record this, and you're going to own it? Cool. But here's what I'm going to do. Very clever.
Yeah, that might be the only song that is really, really far from the original in a way.
Yeah.
In terms of arrangements.
So the only other stuff I wanted to talk about why the album stands out is that, you know, like I said right at the very beginning, we didn't see a lot of cover album, a lot of full on bands and artists releasing a cover album. And after this, I mean, one example is Guns N' Roses. What's it called? The Spaghetti Incident.
Yes,
That one,
yeah,
but it's just full of covers.
Yeah.
As well, and I know, you know, Dream Theater, they haven't done an album full of covers, but they've done their album. I don't remember which album it was, and then they did a little EP afterwards that had 5 covers. It was a few Queen songs, Stargazer by Rainbow, and then an Iron Maiden cover. So you've got to look at this as probably one of the first where an artist has been like, I'm going to tell my audience exactly where my music has come from. Yeah. And as you said, McCartney did it in the 90s, and as I just said, Guns N' Roses as well. So it's a big deal, and it paved the way for rock fans to reconnect with good old rock and roll and have a reminder of why the bands that you loved in the 60s were doing their thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, excellent.
Exactly.
I mean, what do you want to do now? I mean, we could wrap it up or talk about some songs.
I just want to talk about the connections between 3 of the songs and John's.
Can I ask you quickly something?
Career, yeah.
What do you know? What the other 2 songs were that he had to record?
Oh man, you got to check the credits and the songs. I don't remember which ones. It's definitely, I think, is Ya part of this album?
It is, yeah.
So that is one of them. But that's on Walls and Bridges as well. That's where, you know, he started from there.
You missed my little joke.
Which one? Oh yeah.
You said is Ya on there? I said Ya is.
So funny, lass. You should be a comedian.
Give up this podcast malarkey and make people laugh. Sorry, carry on. So Ya, You Can't Catch Me.
I don't know which one is the other one. It's on the record on the credits of you know, when you check the songwriter. I really don't know which one is the other one. It might have been the Little Richard one. Not quite sure.
That's what I'll Google it. Angel Baby, which isn't on this album.
Okay, so he put it on another album.
There you go. Cool.
Okay, or released as a single.
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to tell us the connection.
These songs are really directly connected to Lennon's career or his beginnings as a musician. So the song Bonnie Maroney is a song that he used to play with his first band. So he probably still remembered how to play it. Bebopalula is a song that Paul McCartney saw him playing the evening they met. Apparently, Lennon was playing that song, and it became one of the mandatory songs in the Beatles' early repertoire before they actually started writing their own songs. So that song, Bebopalula, is one of the Beatles' major influences. And my favorite one in the album, Ain't That a Shame, which is a Fats Domino song. Lennon was like a huge fan of Fats Domino, and so am I. I think Fats Domino is great.
We did an episode one of our previous episodes, one of the recent ones, that was Fats Domino. So if you're a fan of Fats Domino, go and check it out, right?
And according to John Lennon himself, Ain't That a Shame was the first song he learned on the banjo, taught by his mum.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, that's it. So it's those 3 songs, and obviously the whole album, but specifically those 3 songs, they have this really deep connection with John Lennon's early, I wouldn't say even career. That was before he actually became a full-time musician, when he was a kid, just you know, having fun and playing and learning music.
And that's what it was all about, man. That's what it's all about. I mean, even this week, news that I was going to tell you, friend to friend, not on a podcast. I bought a guitar because I've struggled. I think I've told the podcast, and you certainly know about my injuries on my arm, which is why I can't play bass anymore. The bass strings are so thick and they're so tight, and to hold down a bass string, it really does. You've got to use your muscles. So I had to go on an electric guitar. And I thought, this is nice, and I've got no pain, no stiffness, no pain the next day in my arms. I got a new guitar and been playing 2 hours every day, and it's all good. Yeah,
man. That's great.
It's great news. Yeah, and on top, but what's really nice, I'm going a little off topic here, is that one problem I had with my bass at the end of my music career was that, for me personally, I picked up the bass so I could play the music I liked. And then as the years went on, and after our course at uni, I found that I was just having to play what the people that paid me told me to play, which is fine. That's a job. That's what it's like to be a musician. But I fell out of love with the bass because it was just like, I can't do what I want anymore. You know, to the point where I'm just sitting there playing root notes on a Friday and Saturday, and it's like, well, I didn't learn Ramble On by Led Zeppelin just to sit and do this. So I'm not going to learn to read music for the guitar. I'm not going to learn theory for the guitar. I'm just going to play it. I'm going to play the riffs I like. I'm going to play the songs I like, because just like Lennon, that's why I fell in love with music. So nice little segue there into that.
And it's good, isn't it? You go back to basics and play.
It's lovely. It's lovely. Just the thought of having to study scales. I'm like, no. I'm just going to read what the tab says, which is what all of my uni teachers will be like. Don't read a tab. Learn the notes. What are you talking about? But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's all good news. Songs. What are your favourites?
Well, my favourite's Ain't That a Shame. I think the way it does it. Stand By Me is an important one for me. It was one of the first songs I've learned to play on drums, to play with my cousins. I had a band with my cousins, and we played that song because it was an easy one to play in terms of chord progression, just 4 chords, and it goes on and on.
Lovely.
And so that was a song that I remember learning on guitar and drums. I love his voice in it, but it's the song that became really famous with the album. So, but Ain't That a Shame is by far my favorite. And You Can't Catch Me, the whole joke with like, let's make it sound more like Come Together, if that was the intention. I don't know, could have been. Is another one. Bunny Maroney as well. The ones I've mentioned, the stories are the ones I like the most.
I like Just Because. I really do. What a lovely little ballad, like a little swung waltz. It's really lovely. And to see out the album as well. But they're all just so brilliant, man. And they all go further. They all go far enough from the cover to be special, but not too far that you forget what the song is. You know. But what an album. Should we wrap up with your monologue?
Yes.
Excellent.
I've been asked. There's a legal obligation, just like Lennon had his. I have a legal obligation to do a monologue for any album that I...
in Felipe's last monologue, he actually copied one of my lines, so I'm suing Felipe to write 3 monologues. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not my favorite thing to do, but...
You're good at it, man. You're good at it. You're good at it.
Yeah. Clear my throat. Let's do this. All right, here we go. The album Rock and Roll took John Lennon back to his musical roots and to the teenage years in Liverpool and Hamburg that turned him into the guitarist, songwriter, and singer that the world has learned to love. Born out of chaos and disrupted by Lennon's rock and roll lifestyle without Yoko by his side, this album reflects the artist's urge to have fun and sing his favorite tunes rather than share his deepest feelings and emotions like he normally did. But the emotion is there. Singing like a young Englishman who just fell in love with American music, John Lennon takes us back to a point in time where young people from all over the world would gather in small clubs, like Liverpool's Cavern Club, to rock and roll all night and become part of one of the most remarkable times of music and pop culture history. That was also the last time Lennon would rock and roll like in the old days. He would soon be reunited with Yoko and ready to dedicate more time to be a father and a husband than to write and play music. This album is the result of a legal issue, a literal car crash, lost studio tapes, and a lot of drinking and misbehaving. Does it get more rock and roll than that? Lennon's tribute to his heroes was also his farewell to the old days and the beginning of a new life, one that was unfortunately cut short only a few years later. John Lennon gave us his heart and soul through his music, but he also used his unique voice to provide us with this beautiful gift of some of the best tunes from the early days of our favorite music. Cheers to John and to all the artists who still make us rock and roll.
Oh man, lovely. Very nice. You got me almost a bit emotional there. It's just, I mean, I love the Beatles, and I have no over admiration for John Lennon. Like I don't, he's not my favorite ever musician, but it still makes me sad when you think, you know, I'm still perplexed that the Beatles did all they did in about 8 years. And
Yeah.
then to see all of them branch off and do their solo careers and nail it as well.
Yeah.
Not one of them really released a terrible album, or not one of them released an album that you could say he shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And obviously the three of them lived for much longer and had lovely lives, and John's was cut short, as we know.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah, but what an artist, right? And he was great at playing the guitar, singing, writing, and also interpreting someone else's music. And that was the one album that he showed that he could do that. He could do other people's music as well as his own stuff.
There you go. Well, thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. If you're listening on Apple, Amazon or Spotify, please make sure to scroll down and give us a review and a rating, as it helps us be seen by more people and reach wider audiences. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe so you stay up to date with our content. We hope to see you again very soon.
Thanks for being with us one more time. Keep on rock and rolling, everyone, and don't do anything I wouldn't do.
And as usual, guys, take care and long live rock and roll.